The lonely black rancher had placed an advertisement seeking a cook, but when the desperate knock came through the blizzard, it carried something entirely different. Ezekiel Thornfield set down the stack of letters beside his coffee cup. 3 responses to his newspaper advertisement, all from men seeking ranch work. None mentioning cooking skills beyond beans and hardtack. The fire crackled in the stone hearth he'd built with his own hands. Outside, November wind howled across the Wyoming Territory, rattling the cabin windows. Snow had been falling since dawn, thick and relentless. He picked up the first letter again. The handwriting was barely legible, the spelling worse. The second came from a drifter wanting winter shelter more than steady work. The third looked promising until the final line mentioned expecting Sundays off for church and Wednesday evenings for poker. Zeke folded the letters and placed them back on the table. 3 years of building this ranch from nothing. 3 years of proving himself to neighbors who questioned his right to claim homestead land. 3 years of eating his own terrible cooking. The pounding started soft, almost lost in the storm's fury. Zeke lifted his head, listening. Wind could play tricks, make a man hear things that weren't there. The sound came again, deliberate, frantic. He rose from his chair, hand moving instinctively to the rifle mounted beside the door. Visitors during blizzards meant trouble. Either someone was lost and desperate, or someone had business that couldn't wait for decent weather. Neither possibility promised anything good. The pounding intensified. Not the confident knock of a neighbor or the steady rhythm of someone seeking ordinary help. This was the hammering of desperation, of someone fighting. Time. Zeke unlatched the door and pulled it open against the wind's resistance. A woman collapsed forward into his cabin, clutching a bundle against her chest. Snow clung to her dark hair and thin coat. Her lips held the blue tinge of severe cold. The bundle in her arms moved and made a small mewing sound. A baby. The woman struggled to her knees, gasping. Her accent carried the lilt of Ireland when she finally managed words. Please, they're following me. Zeke stepped to the doorway, peering into the white darkness. Through the swirling snow, he caught glimpses of light, torches moving closer. Through the storm. How many? He asked, already closing the door. 5, maybe 6. She clutched the infant tighter. The baby's cries grew stronger, more insistent. I can't let them find her. The woman's coat was soaked through. Her hands shook as she tried to calm the child. But what caught Zeke's attention was the paper protruding from her coat pocket. Brown stains covered one corner. Old blood. Whose? Following you? Garrett Killian. The name came out like a curse. He says the baby belongs with him. He says I'm not fit. The torchlight was getting closer. Zeke could make out the shapes of riders now, moving slowly but steadily through the drifts. They'd reach his cabin within minutes. The woman looked up at him with desperate eyes. I know what you're thinking. Strange white woman bringing trouble to your door. You don't owe me anything. She was right. He didn't owe her anything. 3 years of careful living, of proving himself worthy of respect in a territory that questioned his every move. 3 years of building something solid and permanent. One wrong decision could destroy it all. The riders were close enough now that he could hear muffled voices over the wind. The woman pulled herself to her feet, swaying slightly. The root cellar, Zeke said suddenly. Behind the kitchen. Can you manage the ladder with the baby? Relief flooded her features. She nodded and moved toward the back of the cabin without another word. Zeke waited until he heard the cellar door close, then returned to his chair by the fire. He picked up one of the letters and forced himself to read it again, trying to look like a man spending a quiet evening at home. The knock on his door came. Hard and authoritative. Zeke took his time answering. Let them wait in the cold. 6 men stood on his porch, snow covering their coats and hats. The leader was younger than the others, maybe 30, with the kind of clean-shaven face that spoke of money and privilege. His eyes were pale and cold. "Evening," the man said. "I'm Garrett Killian. We're looking for a woman, Irish, traveling." "With an infant. Haven't seen anyone," Zeke replied. "Been inside all day. Weather's not fit for travel." Killian's gaze moved past Zeke into the cabin. "You mind if we take a look around?" "She's not in her right mind. The baby's welfare is at stake. I mind plenty." Zeke shifted his weight, blocking more of the doorway. "This is my property. You got no legal authority to search it. The woman stole something that belongs to me." Killian's voice carried the edge of someone used to getting his way. "I'm prepared to compensate you for any inconvenience." Money always came down to money with men like Killian. They assumed every problem could be bought or bullied away. "Told you already. Haven't seen anyone." The wind gusted, driving snow into the faces of the mounted men. Their horses stamped and shifted, eager to find shelter. Killian studied Zeke's face for a long moment. "You sure about that?" "Sure as winter's cold." Killian nodded slowly, but his expression remained skeptical. "We'll be staying in town tonight. If you happen to remember seeing anything, there's good money in it for you." He turned and mounted his horse. The other riders followed suit. They disappeared into the storm as quickly as they'd arrived. Zeke waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before closing the door. He walked to the kitchen and opened the root cellar. The woman sat on the dirt floor, the baby quiet in her arms. Her eyes held a mixture of gratitude and fear. "They're gone," Zeke said. "For now." She climbed the ladder carefully, protecting the infant. In the better light of the kitchen, Zeke could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25. Pretty, despite the exhaustion and cold. "Thank you." The words came out barely above a whisper. The baby made soft sounds, not quite. Crying, the woman adjusted the blanket around the small face. In the lamplight, Zeke noticed something that made him pause. The child's skin was lighter than expected. The features didn't quite match what he'd assumed about parentage. The blood-stained paper was still visible in the woman's coat pocket. "What's your name?" he asked. "Cordelia O'Malley." She hesitated. "This is Rosanna. What did you steal from Killian?" Cordelia's hand moved protectively to her pocket. "The truth." She said nothing more, and Zeke didn't press. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin walls. Inside, the fire burned steady and warm. But the real storm, he sensed, was just beginning. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, revealing the storm's aftermath. Snow had drifted against the cabin walls, sealing them inside a world of white silence. Cordelia sat at the kitchen table, feeding Rosanna with a bottle she'd prepared from canned milk. The baby's small hands grasped at the air, content and warm. Cordelia's own hands had steadied overnight, no longer shaking from cold and fear. Zeke stood at the window, coffee cup in hand, watching the horizon. No movement, no riders. The storm had erased all tracks, leaving a clean slate of unmarked snow. "How long before they come back?" Cordelia asked. "Depends on how badly Killian wants what you took." She shifted the baby to her shoulder, patting gently. "It's not what I took, it's what I know." Zeke turned from the window. The blood-stained paper still protruded from her coat pocket, now hung on a chair by the fire. She'd been protective of it all night, even while sleeping in the chair beside the hearth. "Killian said you weren't fit to care for the child." Cordelia's jaw tightened. "Killian says many things. Most of them lies." The baby made a small sound of contentment. Cordelia's expression softened as she looked down at the infant's face. In daylight, the child's features were more clearly defined. Light skin, blue eyes, fine hair the color of wheat. Zeke poured himself more coffee. "You were engaged to him." It wasn't a question. Cordelia's reaction confirmed what he'd already suspected. Her shoulders stiffened, her grip on the baby more protective. I was young, foolish. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the endless white. My family came from Ireland with nothing. The Killians owned half the mining claims in the territory. Garrett seemed different then. Charming, generous. What changed? Cordelia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried old pain. I found out what kind of man he really was. What he did to families who wouldn't sell there. Claims. How he used the law to take what he wanted. She touched the pocket where the paper rested. Some things can't be forgiven. Zeke studied her profile against the window light. She wasn't the helpless victim he'd first assumed. There was steel beneath the exhaustion, strength that had carried her through whatever had brought her to his door. The baby's not his. Cordelia's head turned sharply. Her eyes held warning and defiance in equal measure. Rosanna is mine. That's all that matters. Killian thinks otherwise. Killian thinks he owns everything he touches. The words came out bitter. He's wrong. Zeke set down his coffee cup. 3 years of careful living had taught him to recognize when storms were gathering. This woman brought weather he couldn't predict or control. You can't stay here permanent. I know. Cordelia adjusted the baby's blanket. Soon as the snow clears, we'll move on. Where? She had no answer. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths and impossible options. Zeke moved to the stove and began preparing breakfast. Eggs, bacon, biscuits. Simple food that required no conversation. Cordelia watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he handled the cast iron skillet with practiced ease. You cook better than most men. Had to learn. Gets old eating beans every meal. That's why you placed the advertisement. Zeke cracked eggs into the hot pan. Ranch works easier with help. Good cooking's just part of it. Cordelia stood and moved to the counter. Without asking, she began mixing batter for fresh biscuits. Her hands worked with the same efficiency he'd shown, measuring ingredients by sight and feel. You don't trust me, she said. Should I? She kneaded the dough with steady pressure. Probably not. I'm bringing you nothing but trouble. You're bringing me something. Question is what? The biscuits went into the oven. Cordelia wiped her hands on a dish towel and checked on Rosanna, who'd fallen asleep in a makeshift bed of blankets near the fire. I was married, she said suddenly. Rosanna's father was a good man, honest. He owned a small silver claim up in the mountains. Zeke flipped the eggs, waiting. Garrett wanted to buy him out. Offered half what the claim was worth. When my husband refused, Garrett made threats, legal troubles. Accusations of claim jumping. Her voice grew quieter. My husband thought he could fight it. Thought the law would protect honest men. The eggs sizzled in the pan. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Garrett had him killed. The words hung in the air between them. Zeke turned from the stove, studying her face. No tears. No dramatics. Just the flat statement of someone who'd lived with terrible knowledge. You saw it happen. Cordelia nodded. Garrett didn't know I was there. My husband had asked me to bring him lunch at the claim site. I was walking up the trail when I heard the gunshot. She pulled the blood-stained paper from her coat pocket, holding it carefully. My husband lived long enough to write down what happened. Who killed him? Why? Her fingers traced the stained edges. He made me promise to see justice done. Zeke took the pan off the heat. Killian knows you have it. He suspects. That's why he wants Rosanna. Insurance. He thinks I won't testify against him if he has my daughter. The baby stirred in her blankets, making soft sounds. Cordelia moved to comfort her, lifting the child with gentle hands. He's probably right, she admitted. I'd do anything to protect her. Zeke served the eggs onto 2 plates. The biscuits were ready, golden brown and smelling of fresh bread. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the baby's occasional murmurs. After breakfast, Cordelia cleaned the dishes without being asked. She moved through his kitchen with surprising familiarity, knowing where things belonged, how to work the pump handle just right to get steady water flow. "You grew up on a farm," Zeke observed. "County Cork, we had cattle, some chickens. Grew potatoes until the blight came." She dried a plate with careful attention. "Lost everything. Came to America with nothing but hope. Hope's dangerous, so's giving up." Zeke studied her hands as she worked. Calloused from labor, but gentle. When she touched the baby, these weren't the soft hands of a woman who'd lived off others' charity. "I can pay you," she said suddenly, "for the food. The shelter." "With what?" She was quiet for a moment. "I have some money. Not much, but enough for a few days. Keep it. You'll need it when you leave." The words stung, he could see it in the way her shoulders tensed. She'd hoped for more than temporary shelter, but hope was a luxury neither of them could afford. Outside, the sun climbed higher, beginning the slow work of melting the storm's aftermath. By afternoon, the roads would be passable. Killian would return. Cordelia seemed to sense his thoughts. She picked up Rosanna and held her close, staring out at the brightening sky. "He won't give up," she said. "Not ever." "Then you better decide what you're willing to sacrifice to stop him." She turned to face him, the baby quiet in her arms. "What would you do if someone killed your family?" Zeke thought of his fellow soldiers, men who'd trusted him and been left to die when reinforcements never came. Men whose deaths he'd carried for years without justice or closure. "I'd find a way to make it right, even if it cost everything. Sometimes everything's already gone. Sometimes all you got left is the choice to do right or do nothing." Cordelia nodded slowly. She understood. They both carried the weight of debts that couldn't be paid, wrongs that demanded answering. The baby opened her eyes, looking up at her mother with the trusting gaze of innocence. Cordelia's expression softened, but underneath the tenderness, Zeke saw something harder forming. "Then I guess we better figure out how to make this right." The sun continued its work on the snow outside. Soon the roads would be clear. Soon Killian would return with more men and legal papers. But something had shifted in the cabin's warm interior. Two people carrying impossible burdens had found, if not trust, then at least recognition. The storm had brought more than just a desperate woman to his door. It had brought a reckoning that was long overdue. 2 weeks passed without sign of Killian. The snow began its slow retreat, leaving patches of muddy earth that steamed in the morning sun. Cordelia had settled into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She rose before dawn, starting coffee and breakfast while Zeke tended the livestock. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, mixing biscuit dough, frying bacon, preparing meals that reminded him food could be more than mere fuel. The baby thrived in the cabin's warmth. Rosanna had grown plumper, her cries stronger, her sleep more peaceful. Cordelia fashioned a cradle from a wooden crate, lining it with soft blankets. The child spent her days near the kitchen window, watching light play across the ceiling. But distance remained between the adults. Cordelia kept her thoughts guarded, her past locked away except for fragments revealed in unguarded moments. Zeke maintained his own walls, treating her presence as temporary convenience rather than permanent change. The fragile peace shattered. On a Tuesday morning when 3 heifers broke through the fence near the creek, Zeke discovered the break at first light. The cattle had wandered onto neighboring land, mixing with Magnus Whitmore's herd. Whitmore was particular about his property. Lines and had little patience for strays. "I'll need help," Zeke told Cordelia over breakfast. "Can't separate them alone." She looked up from feeding Rosanna. "What about the baby?" "Bring her. Won't take long if we move quick." Cordelia bundled Rosanna in warm blankets and secured her in a sling across her chest. She pulled on Zeke's spare coat and followed him to the corral where he'd saddled 2 horses. "You ride?" "Since I was 7. She mounted with easy grace, adjusting her seat to accommodate the baby. Zeke handed her the reins to his gentlest mare, noting how naturally she held them. They rode through the gap in the fence toward Whitmore's pasture. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of thawing earth and new grass. Cordelia's breath misted as she spoke. "How many neighbors you got?" 5 ranches within riding distance. "Most keep to themselves." "Most?" Zeke nodded toward the cluster of cattle ahead. "Whitmore's different. Came here before the war. Thinks that gives him special rights." They reached the mixed herd. Zeke's 3 heifers stood among Whitmore's. Larger group, distinctive by their smaller size and different brand. Separating them would require careful work. "Circle around the far side," Zeke instructed. "Move slow, don't spook them." Cordelia guided her horse in a wide arc, keeping the baby steady with one hand while managing the reins with the other. She positioned herself opposite Zeke, ready to help guide the strays. The work began smoothly. Zeke urged his heifers away from the larger herd while Cordelia blocked their escape routes. The cattle moved reluctantly but steadily toward the fence line. Then the lead heifer bolted. The animal broke left, heading for a ravine that dropped steeply toward the creek. If she reached it, the others would follow. Getting them out would take hours. Cordelia reacted without hesitation. She spurred her horse forward, cutting off the heifer's path. The baby bounced against her chest as she leaned low in the saddle, turning the animal back toward the group. The heifer fought the pressure, looking for another escape route. Cordelia anticipated the movement, keeping her horse between the cattle and the ravine. Her positioning was perfect, her timing precise. Within minutes, all 3 heifers were moving toward home pasture. Zeke watched in surprise as Cordelia herded them. Through the gap in the fence with the skill of someone raised around livestock. They dismounted by the barn. Cordelia unwrapped the baby, checking to make sure Rosanna was unharmed by the ride. The child had slept through the entire event. "Where'd you learn to work cattle? Told you, we had a farm." Cordelia adjusted the baby's blanket. "Day said women needed to know everything men did. Never knew when you'd have to do it alone." Zeke unsaddled the horses, thinking about what he'd witnessed. Cordelia hadn't just helped with the work. She'd understood it, anticipated problems, solved them without instruction. "You saved me 3 hours of trouble," she shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. That afternoon, Zeke found her in the garden behind the cabin. She'd cleared away dead plants from the previous year, preparing the soil for spring planting. Her hands worked the earth with gentle precision, removing stones and breaking up clods. "Planning to stay for harvest?" Cordelia paused in her work. "Just thought you might want vegetables this summer." "Might not be here for summer." The words hung between them. Both knew Killian's absence was temporary. Eventually, he'd return with more men and legal authority. When that happened, Cordelia would have to run again. Then someone else can tend the garden. She returned to her work, but Zeke noticed the way her shoulders tensed. The careful wall she'd built around her emotions was showing cracks. That evening, he watched her teach the baby to grasp a wooden spoon. Cordelia's voice was soft, encouraging, full of the kind of love that made a house feel like home. "Mama's going to teach you everything," she whispered to Rosanna. "How to be strong, how to be brave, how to take care of yourself." The baby gurgled, in response, waving the spoon like a tiny flag. Cordelia laughed, the first genuine happiness Zeke had heard from her. "She's smart," he said. "She has to be. World's not kind to women who can't think for themselves." Zeke understood. Cordelia was preparing her daughter for a life of uncertainty, teaching survival skills disguised as play. The weight of that responsibility showed in the careful way She handled every interaction with the child. What if Killian never comes back? Cordelia looked up from the baby. He'll come back. Men like him don't let go of things they think they own. What if he did? She was quiet for a long moment, considering the impossible question. Then maybe we could plant beans next to the carrots. Rosanna would like that. Green things growing. It was the closest she'd come to admitting she wanted to stay. Zeke felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Beans are good eating, they are. The baby fell asleep in Cordelia's arms. She carried Rosanna to the makeshift cradle, tucking blankets around the small form with practiced care. When she straightened, Zeke was watching her. What? Nothing, just thinking. About what? Zeke stood and walked to the window. Outside, the moon was rising over his pasture, illuminating the fence he'd repaired, the cattle he'd protected, the land he'd claimed through sweat and determination. About how things change when you're not paying attention. Cordelia joined him at the window. They stood side by side, not touching, watching moonlight paint the landscape silver. Change isn't always bad, she said quietly. No, but it's always permanent. She turned to look at him. In the dim light, her face was serious, thoughtful. Maybe permanent's not something to fear. Depends what you're making permanent. Depends if it's worth keeping. The conversation carried weight beyond its simple words. Both understood they were talking about more than gardens and cattle. They were talking about the fragile partnership that had grown between them, the quiet domestic rhythm that felt dangerously close to happiness. Killian will come back, Cordelia said again. When he does, what then? She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried new resolve. Then we'll be ready. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying scents of earth and growing things. Spring was coming, bringing with it the promise of new life and the certainty of old reckoning. In the cradle, Rosanna slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around her small world. But her mother stood watching over her and beside. Her mother stood a man who'd found something worth protecting. The baby had brought them together. Now they would have to decide what they were willing to risk to stay that way. Garrett Killian returned on a Thursday morning, but not as the desperate pursuer from the blizzard. He arrived in a polished black carriage with brass fittings, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of money and influence. Two well-dressed men accompanied him. Zeke watched from the barn as the carriage stopped in his yard. Cordelia was inside, with Rosanna, unaware of the visitors. The morning had been peaceful, filled with the ordinary sounds of ranch life and the baby's contented gurgling. Killian stepped down from the carriage with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. His companions remained seated, observing. One held a leather portfolio, the other wore a badge on his vest, Mr. Thornfield. Killian's voice carried warmth now, none of the cold authority from the storm night. Beautiful morning. Fine ranch. You've built here. Zeke set down the bridle he'd been mending. What do you want, Killian? To make you a wealthy man. Killian gestured toward the pasture where cattle grazed peacefully. I'm prepared to offer you 3 times what this land is worth. The number Killian quoted made Zeke's breath catch. More money than he'd see in 10 years of ranching. Enough to buy better land, more cattle, a future without the constant struggle of proving himself worthy. In exchange for what? Your help locating Miss O'Malley. She's been missing for weeks now. Her family's worried sick. Killian's tone suggested genuine concern, but his eyes remained calculating. The man with the portfolio opened it, revealing official-looking documents. These are medical assessments. Killian continued. Miss O'Malley has been struggling with her mental state since her husband's tragic death. Sometimes she imagines threats that don't exist. Creates stories to explain her confusion. He handed Zeke a paper bearing an official seal. The territorial court has declared her unfit to care for the child. I've been appointed temporary guardian. The document looked legitimate. Heavy paper, official signatures, legal language that painted Cordelia as dangerously unstable. Zeke studied it carefully, noting how each phrase built a case for removing Rosanna from her mother's care. You're saying she's crazy. I'm saying she's sick, grieving, not thinking clearly. Killian's expression showed practiced sympathy. The child deserves stability, safety. I can provide both. The man with the badge stepped forward. Sheriff's deputy, his authority extending across the territory. His presence gave weight to Killian's claims. Where is she? The deputy asked. Zeke looked toward the cabin. Through the window, he could see Cordelia moving around the kitchen, probably preparing lunch. She looked calm, competent, nothing like the unstable woman described in the documents. Haven't seen her. Killian sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. Mr. Thornfield, I understand your reluctance to get involved. But this isn't about taking sides. It's about what's best for an innocent baby. He nodded toward his companion with the portfolio. Mr. Henderson here represents the Territorial Land Office. He's authorized to finalize the purchase of your ranch. Today, cash payment. No waiting for bank drafts or legal complications. The offer hung in the air between them. Financial security beyond anything Zeke had imagined. An end to the daily struggle of proving himself worthy of respect. Freedom from neighbors who questioned his right to claim homestead land. All he had to do was betray the woman who'd brought purpose back to his life. Why's the baby so important? To you? Killian's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. She's family, my responsibility, not your blood. Close enough. The words carried finality, warning against further questions. Zeke thought about Cordelia's reaction whenever Killian's name was mentioned. The fear that went deeper than ordinary. Threat, the way she held Rosanna closer when discussing the man's intentions. Need time to think about it. Of course. Killian smiled, but his patience was wearing thin. We'll be staying at the hotel in town, but don't take too long. Legal. Proceedings move forward with or without your cooperation. The deputy stepped closer. If she's here, it'd go easier for everyone if you said so now. Told you already. Haven't seen her. The three men exchanged glances. Killian nodded toward the cabin. Mind if we look around? Just to be thorough. I mind plenty, Mr. Thornfield. Killian's voice hardened. I'm trying to handle this reasonably. But if you're harboring a mentally unstable woman who's keeping a child from her legal guardian, that becomes a criminal matter. The threat was clear. Cooperate or face legal consequences that could destroy everything he'd built. Zeke looked at the documents again. They seemed legitimate, but something felt wrong, too convenient. Too perfectly crafted to justify taking Rosanna away from her mother. Come back tomorrow. I'll have an answer then. Killian's smile returned, but his eyes remained cold. 24 hours. After that, we proceed without your cooperation. The three men climbed back into the carriage. As they drove away, Zeke noticed Killian watching the cabin windows, studying the layout of the property. Cordelia appeared in the doorway, holding Rosanna. She'd seen the visitors but stayed hidden until they left. What did he want? Zeke handed her the legal documents. She read them with growing alarm, her face paling as she absorbed the implications. This is all lies. Looks official. They always do. She folded the papers with shaking hands. He's claiming I'm unfit. That I need medical supervision. Are you? The question hung between them. Cordelia looked down at Rosanna, who was reaching for her mother's hair with tiny fingers. Some days I feel like I'm drowning. Like the weight of everything is going to pull me under. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But I've never hurt her. Never would. Zeke studied her face, looking for signs of the instability described in the documents. He saw exhaustion, grief, fear, but also fierce protective love and quiet strength. He offered to buy the ranch, triple what it's worth. Cordelia's shoulders sagged. She understood the implications. Financial security in exchange for her daughter's safety. You should take it. Should I? It's more money than you'll ever see again. Chance to start fresh somewhere better. Zeke took the papers from her hands, reading them again. The legal language was precise, damning. But something nagged at him about the timing, the convenience of documents that solved all of Killian's problems so neatly. What if you really are unfit? Cordelia's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. Then I guess you better decide if you trust what those papers say or what you've seen with your own eyes. She turned and walked back into the cabin, leaving Zeke alone in the yard. Above, clouds were gathering, promising another storm. The wind carried the scent of rain and the distant sound of thunder. Inside the cabin, he could hear Cordelia singing softly to Rosanna, a lullaby in Irish, her voice gentle and loving. The sound of a mother comforting her child. Zeke folded the documents and put them in his pocket. Tomorrow he would have to choose between the security he'd always wanted and the family he'd never expected to find. The storm was coming, and this time it would demand more than just shelter from the cold. The night passed without sleep for either of them. Zeke sat by the fire, turning the legal documents over in his hands. Cordelia paced the kitchen, Rosanna pressed against her chest, both of them restless with approaching storm. Dawn brought no relief, only the certainty that Killian would return for his answer. I've been thinking, Cordelia said over breakfast neither of them touched, about what you asked yesterday. Zeke looked up from his untouched coffee. Whether I'm fit to raise her. Cordelia's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she held the baby. Some nights I wake up screaming. Sometimes I forget to eat for days. There are moments when the grief is so heavy I can barely breathe. She looked down at Rosanna, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, but I've never missed feeding her. Never let her go hungry or cold. Never put my pain before her needs. Her voice grew stronger. Those papers make me sound like a madwoman. I'm not mad, I'm just broken. There's a difference. Zeke studied her face in the morning light. The exhaustion was real, the grief visible in the lines around her eyes. But beneath it all was something unshakable. Show me the letter, he said. Quietly, Cordelia hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. The blood-stained paper was carefully folded, protected by oiled cloth. She handed it to him with trembling fingers. The writing was shaky, done by a dying man in desperate haste. But the words were clear enough. Asterisk Garrett Killian shot me down like a dog. Wouldn't sell my claim. He said no one would believe Irish trash over a Killian. Tell Cordelia I love her. Tell her to run. Take the baby and run far. Asterisk. Below that, in different handwriting, a witness statement. Asterisk I saw it happen. G.K. murdered Thomas O'Malley in cold blood. April 15th, 1874. Signed, Cordelia O'Malley. Asterisk Zeke read it twice, absorbing the implications. This wasn't about custody or mental fitness. This was about silencing the only witness to murder. You could have run, he said. Taken the baby and disappeared. Where? With what money? Cordelia's laugh was bitter. And let him get away with it? Let Thomas die for nothing, so you came here instead. I came here to survive long enough to see justice done. Zeke folded the letter carefully and handed it back. The paper represented more than evidence. It was a dead man's final words. A promise that demanded keeping. Killian's not going to let this go. I know. If we fight him, we could lose everything. If we don't fight him, we lose everything anyway. The sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Through the window, Zeke saw a larger group this time. Killian's carriage, followed by 4 mounted men. The deputy rode alongside, his badge catching the morning sun. "Time's up," Cordelia whispered. Zeke stood and walked to the door. His hand rested on the rifle mounted beside the frame, but he didn't take it down. This fight wouldn't be won with weapons. Killian stepped down from his carriage, all business now. The pretense of friendly negotiation was gone, replaced by cold authority. "Have you reconsidered my offer?" "I have." "And?" Zeke looked back at Cordelia, who stood in the doorway, holding Rosanna. The baby was awake now, looking around with curious eyes. "I'm keeping the ranch." Killian's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "That's unfortunate. Deputy Morrison has a warrant for Miss O'Malley's arrest." The deputy stepped forward, unfolding an official document. "Cordelia O'Malley, you're under arrest for child endangerment and resisting lawful custody orders." "On what evidence?" "Mental instability, failure to provide proper care, flight from legal guardianship proceedings." The deputy's voice was flat, professional. "The child will be remanded to Mr. Killian's custody, pending a full hearing." Cordelia stepped forward, still holding Rosanna. Her face was pale but determined. "I want to see the judge who signed that warrant." "You'll see him at your hearing," Killian said smoothly. "After you've received proper medical evaluation." The threat was clear. Lock her away in an asylum, declare her permanently unfit, make the custody arrangement permanent. By the time she got a fair hearing, Rosanna would be lost forever. "There's another way," Cordelia said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She walked to the center of the yard, holding Rosanna protectively, but no longer hiding. "A public hearing, right here, right now." Her voice carried across the ranch yard. "Let the whole territory decide if I'm fit to raise my daughter." Killian's confident mask slipped. "That's not how the law works." "It's exactly how the law works. Citizens have the right to witness legal proceedings, to hear evidence, to judge for themselves." She turned to address the mounted men who'd come with Killian. "You all have families, children. How would you feel if someone tried to take them based on papers you'd never seen?" One of the riders shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Show them the evidence," Cordelia continued. "Show them what makes me unfit. Let them hear both sides." Killian stepped forward, his patience exhausted. "This is ridiculous. Deputy, arrest her now." But the deputy hesitated. Other people were gathering, drawn by the commotion. Magnus Whitmore had ridden over from his ranch. Several townspeople had come out from the settlement. Word was spreading. "What's the rush?" Whitmore called out. "If the woman's as dangerous as you claim, shouldn't be hard to prove it." Killian's jaw tightened. The situation was slipping from his control. Cordelia seized the moment. She handed Rosanna to Zeke and pulled out the blood-stained letter. "This is why he wants to silence me," she announced, her voice carrying to the growing crowd. "This is why he's so desperate to take my daughter." She began to read her husband's dying words aloud. The crowd grew silent, listening to the testimony of a murdered man. When she finished, Killian was no longer the picture of a reasonable authority. His face was flushed with anger and desperation. "Lies," he said, "the ravings of a delusional woman." "Then let's find out," Zeke said quietly. He stepped forward, still holding Rosanna, and addressed the crowd. "Everyone here knows me, knows I don't make claims I can't back up." He looked directly at Killian. "This woman's been living on my ranch for weeks. I've seen her care for this child every day. Seen her work, seen her sacrifice, seen her love." His voice grew stronger. "If she's unfit, then every mother in this territory is unfit. If she's dangerous, then love itself is dangerous." The crowd murmured agreement. Several women stepped forward, studying Cordelia with sympathetic eyes. "What about the legal documents?" the deputy asked, but his authority was wavering. "What about them?" Zeke replied. "Papers can say anything. We've seen what this woman does, not what someone claims she might do. Killian realized he was losing control of the situation. The public hearing Cordelia had demanded was happening whether he wanted it or not. "This is highly irregular," he said, appealing to the deputy. But the deputy was looking at the crowd of citizens, all of them watching, waiting for justice to be done. His badge gave him authority, but these people would judge his use of it. "Maybe we should hear both sides," he said reluctantly. Killian's careful plan was crumbling. The legal documents that had seemed so powerful in private looked flimsy under public scrutiny. The reasonable authority he'd projected was revealed as desperate manipulation. The storm he'd tried to control was about to break over his head. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people. Word traveled fast in frontier communities, especially when it involved accusations of murder and corruption. Women stood beside their husbands. Children peered out from behind parents. Old men leaned on walking sticks to hear better. Deputy Morrison looked uncomfortable with his audience. The legal papers in his hand seemed less authoritative under so many watchful eyes. "This ain't a proper courtroom," he said weakly. "Justice don't need a building," Magnus Whitmore replied. "Just needs honest folks willing to listen." Killian stepped forward, trying to regain control. His expensive suit and polished boots marked him as different from the working people gathered in Zeke's yard. "These proceedings are meaningless. I have legal authority. Court-appointed guardianship," he gestured toward Cordelia. "This woman is delusional. Dangerous. The child's safety depends on removing her from an unstable environment." "Show us the instability," called out Mary Patterson, a rancher's wife who'd buried 3 children of her own. "Show us the danger." Killian's confidence wavered. "The medical evaluation speaks for itself." "What medical evaluation?" Cordelia stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly. "I've never been examined by any doctor. Never been declared unfit by anyone who's actually met me." She held up the blood-stained letter. "This is what he's afraid of. Evidence that he murdered my husband for a silver claim." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mining disputes were common, but murder was serious business. "Lies," Killian said, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning. "Fabricated evidence. The woman's grief has twisted her memory." "Then let's hear the whole story," Whitmore said, "from the beginning." Cordelia looked at Zeke, who still held Rosanna. The baby was calm, content in his arms. She drew strength from that image and began to speak. She told them about her husband's silver claim, about Killian's offers to buy it for far less than it's worth, about the threats that followed when Thomas refused to sell. Her voice remained steady as she described finding her husband dying, his final words, the confession he'd managed to write before death took him. "I saw Garrett Killian shoot my husband down. I signed my name as witness. That's why he wants to take my daughter. Not because he cares about her welfare, but because he knows I'll do anything to protect her." The crowd listened in absolute silence. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of what they were hearing. When Cordelia finished, she carefully folded the letter and put it away. "That's my story, true as I can tell it." Killian's face had gone pale. Accusations, hearsay, the ravings of a traumatized woman. "Got any proof she's lying?" asked Jim Crawford, who owned the general store. "I don't need proof of innocence. She needs proof of guilt." "That's not how it works, Deputy," Morrison said quietly. "Not in a murder case." The words hung in the air. Murder case. What had started as a custody dispute had become something much more serious. Zeke stepped forward, still holding Rosanna. "I've watched this woman for weeks. Seen how she cares for her child. Seen her work, her sacrifice, her love." He looked around at the gathered faces. "Any of you who've raised children know what good mothering looks like. Look at this baby. Look at how content she is. Look at how healthy." Rosanna chose that moment to gurgle happily, reaching tiny hands toward her mother. The sound carried clearly in the morning air. Does this look like a child who's been neglected, endangered? Zeke's voice grew stronger. Or does this look like a child who's been loved and protected by someone willing to risk everything for her safety? Several women in the crowd nodded. They recognized the signs of good care, the bond between mother and child that couldn't be faked. Mary Patterson stepped closer to examine the baby. Healthy color, good weight, alert eyes. She looked up at Cordelia. How old? 4 months. Sleeping through the night? Most nights. Eating well? Growing like a weed. Mary nodded approvingly. This child's been well cared for. Any fool can see that. Other women murmured agreement. The evidence of their own eyes contradicted everything in Killian's legal documents. Killian realized he was losing ground. The woman's mental state is irrelevant to her child care abilities. She's traumatized, unstable, prone to dangerous delusions. What delusions? Whitmore asked. She believes I killed her husband. She's created an elaborate fantasy to explain her grief. Then where's her husband? Asked Crawford. If he wasn't killed, where is he? Killian faltered. He died in a mining accident. Tragic, but not uncommon. Got a death certificate? Morrison asked. Of course. Can we see it? Killian's hesitation was answer enough. The crowd sensed his uncertainty, his growing desperation. Seems to me, Whitmore said slowly, if a man's got nothing to hide, he'd be eager to show his proof. This is ridiculous, Killian snapped. I don't answer to a mob of farmers and shopkeepers. The insult landed poorly. These people had built their lives through hard work and mutual support. Being dismissed as unworthy of truth only strengthened their resolve. You'll answer to the territorial judge, Morrison said firmly. I'm taking you both to town for a proper hearing. Both? Killian's voice rose. Murder's a serious charge. Needs investigating. Cordelia felt a wave of relief. A real hearing meant a real chance at justice, but Killian wasn't finished. The child comes with me, he said desperately. My guardianship papers are still valid until proven otherwise. Like hell, Zeke said quietly. The crowd turned to look at him. He still held Rosanna, who had fallen asleep in his arms. This baby stays with her mother until a real judge makes a real decision based on real evidence. You have no legal standing. Killian protested. I got moral standing. And witness standing. And the standing of a single man who's watched this woman sacrifice everything for her child's welfare. Zeke looked around at the gathered faces. Anyone here think this baby should be separated from her mother based on papers we can't verify from a man who won't answer? Honest questions? The response was immediate and unanimous. No one spoke in favor of removing Rosanna from Cordelia's care. Morrison nodded slowly. Child stays with the mother pending judicial review. Both of you come to town tomorrow for formal proceedings. Killian's carefully constructed plan had completely collapsed. His legal authority meant nothing without community support. His wealth couldn't buy respect he hadn't earned. This isn't over, he said, but the words sounded hollow. Yes, it is, Cordelia replied. One way or another, it ends tomorrow. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their own lives with the satisfaction of having witnessed justice in action. Several women stopped to examine Rosanna, offering Cordelia encouraging words and practical advice. Whitmore approached Zeke as the others left. Good man, he said simply. Community needs more like you. After everyone had gone, Zeke and Cordelia sat on the cabin steps, Rosanna sleeping peacefully between them. The morning's tension was fading, replaced by quiet exhaustion and cautious hope. Tomorrow we'll know, Cordelia said. Tomorrow we'll finish it. She looked at him with gratitude and something deeper. Why did you take the risk? You could have taken his money and avoided all this trouble. Zeke was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun climb higher over his pasture. His cattle grazed. Peacefully, the fence was mended. The garden showed signs of new growth. Used to think security meant being left alone, protecting what was mine from anyone who might take it. He looked down at the sleeping baby. Turns out real security comes from having something worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. Cordelia reached over and took his hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, you gave us a chance. That's more than anyone else was willing to do. Spring was coming to Wyoming territory. The hard ground was softening, ready for new seeds. In the distance, storm clouds were breaking apart, letting sunshine through. They had found each other through desperation and need, but they would face whatever came next through choice and commitment. The lonely rancher had wanted a cook, but he'd found something infinitely more valuable. He'd found a family worth keeping. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.